The polygonal walls, or the Cyclopean walls, are very well in line or associated with the Aurignacian culture, that reigned from 47,000 to 41,000 years ago, so the bulk of building of the polygonal walls most probably has been in that period. The polygonal walls, or the Cyclopean walls, are also rather well in line with the known Neanderthal sites, so building of walls could very well also have been in their period, that is for sure older than the period of the Aurignacian culture from 47,000 to 41,000 years ago. Only after those two groups, the polygonal wall building will expand further to the east to the Balkan, Greece, and Caucasus, amongst others. Groups that are involved with mummification, like also the Egyptians, will get involved later on. The Aurignacian culture is generally associated with Y-DNA haplogroup R1b, but also with the older Y-DNA haplogroup C1. The Neanderthals are associated with haplotype B006. All these have their root in the Americas, and consequently are out of Americans. For example, the Y-DNA haplogroup R1b, which today is the dominant haplogroup in Europe and Western Eurasia, provingly has its prehistoric root R1 only in the Americas, and nowhere else in the world. Its root and consequently all its descendants have high frequencies of the by many supposed and by consensus wrongly assumed Neanderthal fraction. Haplotype B006 that is associated with the Neanderthals obviously carries the same Neanderthal fraction. So there is no need for any hypothesis of interbreeding with Neanderthals, simply because it descends from its American prehistoric roots all along, since it is exactly them that will turn over all the populations of native Europeans and Western Eurasians. All the here mentioned groups are also associated with mountain ranges, and more specifically with mine-rich mountain ranges, especially so in the case of the Neanderthals. For the above reasons, the involved groups are even more so associated with the Lincombian-Ranisian-Jerzmanowician, LRJ Mountain-Ranges, across Europe, that in turn present evidence of modern humans, as well as Neanderthals, and as such links them together. Further, the Lincombian-Ranisian-Jerzmanowician, LRJ, mountain ranges add Stonehenge to the equation. Further, these draw all the mentioned groups also geographically closer to the Americas, which are already confirmed by genetics to be their ancestor to be part of this equation. The roots of haplotype B006, Y-DNA haplogroup C and are all lie in the Americas. That is also where all the ancestral markers point to. So in some simple rational moves, we have a rough dating and roughly know the groups, who or, that already were and will become involved in polygonal wall building. Also because of the genetics, we also know where they came from, as well as the routes they followed to the places where the polygonal wall building took place. So all the concentrations of all involved groups were located and active in resource-rich regions, so logically they had mining in mind when choosing their destinations. Neanderthal mining class in a complex culture. There is plenty of evidence that Neanderthals were a mining class in a more complex, hierarchic culture that had its origin in the Americas. Further, we can hypothesize that polygonal wall building involves mining, this also because the material used is not regional. Resuming, the builders come from the Americas, and initially are mainly looking for resources in other continents, and because of this clearly were advanced cultures. Atlantis-like. It is clear they came from west of Gibraltar and focus initially on regions of their interest immediately east of or in range of Gibraltar, as well as on some Atlantic facades with less favorable climates at the time, which happens to be during the former Ice Age. In fact, the Aurignacian culture peaked pretty much during the Ice Age maximum, so mountains as well as resources across the world were more limited at the time, because many of them were covered by thick glacier or permafrost. Plato is a descendant of these builders of American origin, and his descriptions, if correct, make it clear that a division between the Americas, Atlantis, and their offspring in Eurasia had taken place. That is why Plato knew about them, and claimed that Atlantis, also the Greeks' American root culture, had been too demanding, and supposedly were kind of punished for that by the gods. Since the miners and builders were many, they had to be fed, clothed, and housed en masse. Next to clothing, also housing most probably involved animal hides. That is why industrial-scale stone tool catches, intended for mining, fauna, and hide handling, as well as fat production, all these on industrial scale, were found across the involved regions and rivers, and also across the rest of the world, where provingly similar activities took place. All these that would turn over all native and/or earlier Eurasian populations, and consequently would form all modern humans, originated from the Americas, hence that all ancestral markers of the whole world point to the Americas. Therefore, or further, these cultures also involved in mining and building have well-defined megafauna handling, mining and building classes. Stonehenge was built by the building class. Like YDNA I and I2, this before 4,500 years ago, and as soon as built inhabited by more elite classes, like YDNA R1b, directly arriving from the Americas through the Atlantic gyres and currents, this after 4,500 years ago. These elites would build up and expand mainly as the Bell-Beaker culture. When this is all well formed, more for consensus more typical cultures with for consensus more familiar hierarchy and classes would follow, like also the Greek and Roman cultures, and obviously also the Egyptian cultures. All these cultures will present genetic descendancy from the earlier groups that came from the Americas, and that carried their characteristic high frequencies of the, wrongly supposed to be the result of interbreeding, supposed DNA Neanderthal fraction. There is a possibility that there was indeed some direct interbreeding with Neanderthals, but that did not lead to any detectable DNA amongst modern humans. In other words, if there had been descendants of interbreeding with Neanderthals, these were a. later absorbed by the numerous arrival of out-of-Americans carrying another variant of R1b. B. These were turned over together with the natives, or c. they or even before their parents returned to the Americas or went or were sent somewhere else. Because of ancient DNA research, we also know how Eurasian natives, and especially the Western Eurasian natives, were wiped out by out-of-Americans, this in the by ancient DNA proven population turnover events. Further, it is clear interbreeding with Neanderthals never was significant, because none of the interbreeding markers, like also Neanderthal mtDNA, which is a version of mtDNA-L, similar to the later mitochondrial Eve, can be found amongst modern humans. Further, the Aurignacian-Culture is genetically related to the Clovis people and a. are Clovis people and/or their descendants and/or b. have the same American ancestor in common with the Clovis people, something which is already extensively and independently proven by all ancestral markers.